So now we've gone through the overall sort of interface and how you get around and use Grid Studio. Now let's use a practical example of what someone would do with Grid Studio. As mentioned earlier, Grid Studio is a platform where you have all this data aggregating of everything of your system, allows you to then take a look at the data that is receiving coming in, monitor what is going on, apply some logic on top of that, then maybe convert that, send that data back out, either with the same protocol or convert it with a different protocol. As a simple example, we're going to assume that we're receiving something like SACN. The first thing you need to do is to create the SACN IO connection. So how to do that is you would come in here under the project tree. There is the option to come in here, click on the plus icon here, or you can just right click on an empty space, and then you can get the same list. You can then scroll through and find that object that you're looking for, or under the search bar, which by default, when you just right click and bring this menu up, it's already there. So you can then type in SACN and you get that, and you can click and then it will create that object for you. With a lot of these connections, you would obviously need to define and tell the software which network interface we are actually receiving the data on. And once that is defined, oftentimes on an IO connection, there are little monitors or ways to actually see what is going on. You can access that through some of the icons or the headers up at the top right of the inspector. And over here, this is the monitor of SACN. So if we open that, you can then see, hey, we are now receiving data. Data is coming in live on universe 1, address 1, 2, and 3. It's great that we can monitor that data over here, but oftentimes, this is not, you're not going to always open up, all of these different windows just to view one value, for example. So what we can do is then on the board, let's create a small little readout of that. So we would need to first create a board. Then from the SACN IO connection, you have the option to drag from the board, from the project tree into the board. And you have the option to create some nodes. And there is the option for a receiver or sender. In our situation, we want the receiver. And by default, it being sitting at universe 1 and address 1, now those are exactly a address that we are receiving data on. So now you can see the data is coming in already through the inspector. But of course, you're not always having the inspector this open. So what we can do is then from the output pin of this value, we can then drag out and then create a node. The node that we're looking into is the SPI node. So then now we have a SPI node, and we can now actually, without selecting on that object, still be able to view what that value looks like. Now, assuming that everything looks good, we are now going to convert this into a different protocol. So let's say we want to convert that as OSC message. Again, the same thing, create that OSC IO connection. And in this instance, I'm only interested in using it as an output device, so I can disable the inputs. So this is a great opportunity to actually look into some of these icons in the inspector and what they do. Oftentimes in a container of the inspector, you'll find a little icon like this. And if you click on that, that basically toggles that container on and off. By doing this over here on the OSC input, I'm now disabling all OSC input. Then the OSC output, you can see that there's a little plus icon, so I can create multiple destinations. And then also at the same time, I can individually disable some of those outputs as well. Or if we go up to the one layer higher, we can disable all of those outputs. And as you would imagine, the one at the very top there, that just disables all of those things. So there's a bit of a hierarchy in terms of which one gets turned on and which one gets turned off. So just be mindful of that. And now let me just clean this project up because I'm just sending it to one destination, for example. So similar to the SACN protocol, you can again drag from the project tree and drop it onto the board. And now you have the option to do a few things. And in our instance, we want to use the OSC sender. And with OSC, a lot of you may be aware, you would need to define the OSC address. Other than just the IP address, you would need to define the OSC address. And for example, I want to send it on SP grid float 1. And all I need to do is just connect the two values pins together. And now I am sending OSC messages out. That's great. Now, oftentimes, this is not what you're doing, right? This is way too simple. Your data is not going to be as simple as just converting, just straight up conversion. You need to manipulate that data a little bit. And assuming in this instance, we want to range this value. So one way to do that is again from the value output pin of the SACN, we can drag that out and then create another node called Ranger. And with the Ranger, you get to define the input pin's lower and upper limit and the output pin lower and upper limit. The input looks fine because it is also between 0 and 1, just like what it's coming in from the SACN. But on the output side, let's say I want it to be between 0 and 255. So that's how I can then rescale that to between 0 and 255, or even you can then offset that slightly and adjust the lower limit to be, let's say 80. And then now it is between 80 and 255. And now all you need to do is take the output pin and connect that to the value of the to the OSC sender. And now we're sending on that value between 80 and 255. Great. Now that is a simple example of receiving some data, monitoring what is going on, add some logic on top of that before we send it back out. As with projects like this, and as you grow your projects to be more complicated or do more things, you have more of these OSC senders, and it becomes a little annoying if every single time you want to adjust this, you have to look for this node again in this board. And you can imagine if the systems becomes bigger and bigger, to find the correct node can become harder as well. So what we can do is actually, one way is that in the project tree, you can create a variable. So I can literally create a string variable that's going to store this string. So I'm going to call /sp/grid/f1 instead of float1. And then I'm also just going to give it a name, say OSC path1, just so that I know which variable is which. Now that I've saved this, now I want to link this OSC path value to that variable. And to do that, you would need to come in here, right click on that parameter, and under control mode, there are different options, and one of which is variable. And you can then come in here, select the variable, and then choose from the list OSC path 1. And now you can see this is sp/grid/f1. So now that gets changed immediately. And just while we're on this topic, in the inspector, you find some little other icons up at the top of the header. The one on the far right is to lock that so that this inspector is always locked to this OSC sender. The one next to it is to pop out a new inspector window, but also pin it and lock it so that it is only on this OSC sender. So what you can do, for example, I can pop a new window out for this OSC path. Let me select that, make it, and drag it next to this inspector. And then now for this inspector, I want to load the OSC, or actually this OSC sender. So now you can see side by side the string variable and the OSC sender path. And you can see by me changing it to F2, this gets updated immediately as well. So that's how you can create that link. As you can see, there are different control modes. Target is then to target a specific parameter rather than just one generic object. A variable, a expression is you can use that to write a small little expression. So you can then manipulate that slightly as well. So on top of just getting access to a variable, you can then add some logic on top of that. And to search and get access to any specific variable, you can see here there is the option to say copy expression address. So that's how you get access to the address for this. And then you can then come in the expression, paste that in, and then add whatever logic on top you want there. And then, of course, by default, which was there, was manual. So that just means someone has to manually go in and enter the value for that parameter. So that's another way where you can have quick access of that path. And then under the project tree, then you can also, at the very top with the search bar, you can then search for that objects directly by typing in here. You can also use this to then search for a specific type by saying type, let's say OSC, or just use some of the generic filters that we have provided. Let's say here, so you can filter out, for example, for a camera, for a device, for an IO objects, for objects, for a pool, for a sensor, things like that. So if, for example, you are prefer the sort of version 1 of SP, how everything is laid out, you can, just like how we have multiple inspectors, you can bring out multiple project window up here at the top. And I can then apply one that is for objects, for example, and then let's say I place this here and then create another window, and this filters out, for example, IO connection. So that is then your connection window. So these at the end are just looking at the same project tree. So you just have one single project tree for your entire project. These are just different views or filters applied to that project tree. So just makes it easier and shortlists certain things that you are highlighting that you want to look into or manipulate to have quick access with. So that's how you can create different views of your project, and then using the node system to then monitor, add logic, and then send it back out to a final destination. Cool. Let me just create a folder and organize things neatly. And here, the way to use the project tree is then you can then select all of this and place it under the project tree. And now you've got a much more organized screen, for example.